of my favorite times of the week. We have Evelyn Gould with us here in the studio. Evelyn is a BCBA, a board-certified behavior analyst, and a wealth of information. And more than that, because I love the information that you bring in, Evelyn, but I love the energy that you bring to everything that you do. Because Evelyn, if you don't watch the show, Evelyn gives us permission to have our feelings. Evelyn is that force in our lives that says, you know what, stuff is going on and let's make room for it and move through it. And you change the way I'm doing things, Evelyn, and I love that. and I find myself quoting you all the time and going, okay, that's going on, I gotta make room for it. I'm gonna stop denying and avoiding and just make room for it.
Right, I'm doing a lot of that myself this morning.
Well, and we all need to. We all need to, and it's very human. And you are as empathic as anybody I have ever met, and I think that makes you particularly effective working with our kids, and but also working with the adults who are not on the spectrum, you know, and you always remind me about, you know, these are tools that not only can we use and have for our kids, but they're tools that we need for ourselves. And I just really appreciate that and want to say, you know, how I see you constantly being in the place where you are advocating for parents as much and more, I think, than actual parents sometimes do. So. Which is a wonderful, because sometimes, you know, quite honestly, we're too overwhelmed. We don't even know, I said earlier, we don't even know what to ask for.
Well, I think that we all are not necessarily our strongest advocates. You know, I probably don't do the best job at advocating for myself a lot of time, and tend to think about other people's opinions and what other people want and what other people are doing, or just other stuff, or just feeling overwhelmed. Like I don't even have the energy to respond to this thing that's being presented to me right now, or I'm so overwhelmed or angry or stressed I can't even think of what to say. Or I think we all have that.
Thank you, because there it is again. You know, saying, okay, it's okay that we are not our best advocates. She gives us permission to be ourselves and have our feelings. And I asked you specifically this week because we had so many comments in the last couple of weeks and people writing in and saying, you know, there was a comment that somebody had written in 2 weeks ago saying, how do I get my girls to talk? Was the comment on the live site. And it was one of those questions which it's that, you know, because you see somebody write that and you know, there's so much you want to say and so much hope you want to give people and so much emotion in those just a few short words, but it's not something that can be answered in just this, you know, well, you know, here. But one of the things that you mentioned when we were talking about it was you said it's so important to be teaching functional communication skills, that's got to be the priority in a lot of cases. I mean, you know, we want functional in all. I was just going to say, is it just some case? We all want functional communication skills for our children, and we said this
and
is just
ourselves. I know a lot of some colleagues I can think of that I've worked with who could have done with some training in using their communication functionally.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, is there anyone among us that couldn't strengthen skills and fill in other things? And you know, I want to learn how to communicate better. And in a very real way, I want to be able to communicate better with my child, but quite honestly, I want to be able to communicate better with all kinds of individuals. I have a friend, a really good friend, who I love and respect and adore and admire, and we know now that when she asks me for directions, it's going to be a really difficult situation because I'm a visual person, she's a concept person, and I started giving her directions to something the other day, and she said, okay, I need you to stop, because I was saying, oh, you know, it's right by that blue building, and I went, I'm doing it. I have to stop. I'm so sorry. And I tried to think about how can I say it in as few words as possible. What streets do I know the street name that I can send her down? Because I know that we don't. And we're the best of friends, but we don't communicate well in terms of directions.
I think that's the key, because when you were talking about functional communication, what we're meaning is not just. You know, someone can have, like your friend, can have a bunch of words, a bunch of vocabulary, but they're not able to understand what you're saying.
Right.
Or you might have a bunch of vocabulary and you're trying to communicate a message and it's not going across effectively. Right. And so neither of you are getting your needs met.
Exactly.
So the point about functional communication is it's less about teaching content or teaching the words or teaching specific, like whether that's visual or written or whatever it is, and more about how do you get your message across to get your needs met in an appropriate way that works in the context of where you are.
And I need this lesson today. I'm just being honest here. I need this lesson today because, you know, we all have different things that we encounter. And, you know, I know that there are some things, a couple of things that I got to do later on today where I need to up my game in terms of communication because I feel like, you know, I'm not getting it done. So, this isn't about teaching me functional communication skills, but I'm going to try and learn while you're teaching us about teaching
our kids.
Yes, so, teaching our kids. Yeah.
So
our
by
kids on the
functional, we mean that it functions for the person to get their needs met in an appropriate way for the setting that they're in.
Right.
So kids can be communicating with us all the time, but in very inappropriate ways that don't get their needs met, or maybe do, but just in very inappropriate ways. So like someone who is screaming and having a tantrum is communicating with you, but in a very inappropriate way, and they may or may not get their needs met. And sometimes they can be, those inappropriate ways can be very effective at getting what you want. So you can, you know, we have the classic example of the kid in the grocery store having a meltdown because they want a lollipop at the checkout, and then mum's feeling so overwhelmed by the embarrassment or what she is thinking that other people are thinking about her kid, and also just like I can't be dealing with this right now, I need to get out to the car and do these billion other things that I have to do, and everyone's looking at me and blah blah blah, that she just gives in and gives the kid a lollipop to shut them up. Right,
and we've all been there and caved in. And
so in a way that communication was effective, and that the kid was like, I want a lollipop, and it got them the lollipop, but it wasn't functional in the sense that it was very, very inappropriate, and in the long term isn't doing them any good, and isn't doing their parent any good, but definitely not beneficial really for the child.
Right, long term.
So long term, functionally, that's not okay.
Right, but. So we gain an understanding of what functional communication is, and then when we put it through the filter of autism, because I feel like there's a little bit of a stigma maybe that parents feel like, well, you know, I want my child to be vocal. I want vocal speech. I want my child to talk. And when experts start talking to them about functional communications, I feel, you know, I hear and feel from parents, and I was there at one point, it feels like a small death. Like, you know, but while that feeling is real, it isn't accurate for what's being said to them.
No, it's not. So the reason that we talk about teaching functional communication first above all and everything else is that really we need to be getting their needs met, and realizing that communicating in appropriate ways to get their needs met is the best thing that they could do. And teach them different ways of using communication to get their needs met, and once you do that, then you can start thinking about more of the way that the child's communicating or the content of what they're saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But like I said before, we could teach, and we do have some children who come to us who have like a bunch of language, and they do speak, or maybe they don't. That's the point. They have but we know they have all these words, and they know all these words, but they're not using them, so they're still not talking. And the point being they're not using them, and that's the functional part of the functional communication. Like we want to concentrate on helping those kids to use their language rather than just adding more language to it. Because if they're not using it, what's the point? They're not, you know, that the whole point of having words is to use it to communicate. So we're trying to focus, as behaviour analysts, focus on how kids use their language, and by language that might start off being a visual picture rather than, it doesn't have to just be words. And sometimes what we see is kids just find it easier to initially learn how to communicate using pictures before they start to speak, and then later on the speech may come. But it's about finding the way that works for the particular child. And so some children pick up PECs, for example, the picture exchange, very well. Other kids, we start with object exchange. It's exchanging an object to indicate you want something, and it could be like exchanging an object that's related to what you want, or like giving a cup to indicate that you want a drink or something rather than a picture. For other kids, it can be using sign. In the UK, we have British Sign Language. So you have American Sign Language here. I'm not sure exactly what the differences are, but we have British Sign Language. But actually, we also have Makaton. I don't know if you know about Makaton, but Makaton we used a lot with some of our kids because it's it's like a simplified sign language.
Okay.
It kind of doesn't have the complex grammar and stuff that sign language does. So for some kids that worked better for them.
Okay.
So there's like a lot of different modes of communication that you can use. But what we find is if we teach kids the function, like how to use communication, like how to make requests, these different types of ways you can use your language. If we teach kids those different ways of using language, that later on the speech will come. But if we just try to teach them words without use, like without the function being there, that they're going to have a really, really hard time of acquiring or starting to talk, starting to communicate.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of, a metaphor that goes with it. And I don't know, it's not a great one, but I'm thinking of, it would be like giving somebody a guitar and teaching them the positions in which to play the notes, but not teaching them how to play music.
And also not teaching them how wonderful it is and the good things that can happen when you do play music, and the joy that you bring other people, and not being reinforcing to you, because it has to be reinforcing.
Yes.
As we talk all the time, people won't do something if it's not going to be reinforced.
Right, you got to get a paycheck.
Right.
You won't do it again.
Right, exactly. So just giving kids a bunch of words is not necessarily going to be reinforcing for them.
Right.
It's teaching them how to use those words, because then they're getting their needs met, and that's why kids will continue to use their words then, or use their communication, because they start to realize, oh, if I do this, then I'm going to get this thing that I want.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we're shaping up people being reinforcing for kids, or teaching them that, oh, people can be reinforcing to you because they can give you things that you like.
Right.
And so we're working on a lot of pairing with reinforcement, and pairing praise with reward, so that kids start to like praise and so on. And that paired with teaching the functions of different ways to use your language will hopefully start the kid kind of communicating, and then we can start thinking about teaching words and so on.
Now here's the conundrum for me always, that as a parent, that all kids need to learn functional communication at some point, because they do not come out of the womb with it. So all kids need to learn it. But it seems like in our society that for a typically developing child, the functional communication skills, we take for granted how they learn it.
We do.
But it's it seems like it just happens and nobody acknowledges how it happens. I don't think that the typical parent really stops to think about how that came about, and that it didn't come about overnight, that it was a series of steps, a series of reactions, but the child was automatically reinforced by things and continued to get better at it, but it happened over a period of time.
Right.
And then our kids don't do it.
Yeah.
And then we have an expectation that there should be some way, either we're despondent and going they can't learn it, or that they should be able to learn it and they should learn it, and there should be a shortcut and they shouldn't have to go through all those steps that a typical kid went through.
And that's not the case.
Right.
So for whatever reason, we know that our kids with autism just don't apparently seem to learn in the same way that typically developing kids learn, and we're not really sure exactly why that is.
Right.
But they're not responding to their environment in the same way that typical kids do. But what we do know is that typical kids do go through stages of development in terms of their language, and there does seem to be a pattern. So first of all, kids start babbling and making sounds, and then parents imitate those sounds, and then kids start paying attention, and then you're kind of shaping the babbling, and then kids make requests. The first type of communication that kids make is to make a request and get something back from their caregiver. So
which we said yesterday, our word yesterday was manned. Right.
So mans are what come first. And so there does seem to be a pattern of development in terms of language, but for typical kids it's like it sort of seems to slide along without any effort.
Right.
And we know that there is some effort in parents. There's a lot of people studying interactions between parents and children to see kind of what are parents doing. They're kind of shaping the child's language.
Right.
And so if you have a child with autism, for whatever reason, they just don't seem to respond to these types of interactions or the environment in the same way, or perhaps it's just that kids with autism need many more pairings, or they have a bunch of other stuff going on, so they're not attending to the right cues, for example. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why that might be.
And it could be different for every kid.
Exactly,
too.
And it can be different for every kid. And And all kids with autism have their own learning styles and their own pattern or path of learning, and some will progress very quickly through certain things, others will struggle with certain things but be really great at other things. Every child's different, but we do tend to try and look at the development of a typical child, and then we'll start teaching the imitation, so that kind of idea of the child imitating what you're saying, and then start working on manding and so on. Like, we try to follow that path of development with our kids with autism.
But you power pack it so it's specific?
Exactly.
And rewarded.
Right, and we power pack it by being very, what's the word? Very deliberate about what we're doing with the child, and reinforcing, rather than with typical kids, they don't seem to need that control. They just kind of learn it. Right,
they can have a whole lot of things going on, and they can find it reinforcing, and what we're doing with the kids with autism, correct me if I'm going down the wrong path here, is that we really try to isolate it and make it abundantly clear and abundantly reinforcing so they can't miss it.
And the other thing is that we make sure we're teaching each function of language. So rather than, like I said, teaching a child the word milk, just the word, here's the word milk, milk, we want to teach them how to use that word in various different settings very deliberately. So we don't make assumptions that if we teach the child to say milk when they see a glass of milk, so I hold up the milk and your kid says milk, and then I'm like, oh great, now they know milk, they're going to use it no matter what. If they need milk, they'll use it. If I ask them what is it, they'll say milk. If they see a picture, they're going to say milk. I don't make that assumption that they're suddenly going to use that word in all different ways, because the likelihood is they're probably not initially. So what we have to do is teach them, hold up the milk, they say milk, but we also need to teach them to use it as a request. So when they want it, they're going to say milk. When I say what comes from a cow, they're able to say milk. When they see a picture and they say milk, when they see a milk van, they say milk. Like, I'm going to deliberately teach them all these different ways that they can use those words. And again, like, it doesn't have to be speech, it can be picture exchange, it can be object exchange, it could be sign, it's whatever mode of communication the child is going to pick up fastest initially. And often it's not words. Okay, a very important point. We should take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, so if it's different for every child, you know, how, when a team of therapists that's being driven by a BCBA, how they decide where to start. Let's talk a little bit about that. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with more with Evelyn Gould. Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm here with Evelyn Gould, and we're talking about functional communication. I sort of wish that they had been able to be with us during the break, because we always talk about interesting things, and you expand my head. And but I was saying to Evelyn during the break that I really want to talk about how there's a really important step along the way that we have to take a moment and assess where the child is, right? Before you start.
And that, you know, I know a lot of you are working in a lot of different ways at home, you know, that you're putting together an ABA program, or you're trying to put together an ABA program, and you're using different methods of doing that. You may have a fully funded ABA program with a BCBA who is helping to make the design choices. You may be using the CARDI Learning and the Skills program on your own. You may be doing that with consultation. You may be doing a workshop program where you're having, I mean, there's so many different ways, and I'm grateful that we have all those ways now. I think that that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't change that when we want to have a child have functional communication skills, all of our kids are different. They're in different places. They have different skill levels, and their skill levels are not necessarily linear.
So yeah, you really need to do an assessment to know where to start. And I think the first thing that I would assess actually would be what the behaviour problems are, what's really significantly impacting the child and their family right now. And if it's something like, oh, the child's having meltdowns all the time, looking at that and working out why the child's having the meltdown and where the communication breakdown is. What is this child saying when they're having a meltdown? What is it they're trying to get? And then that would become my focus for, right, we need to give this child a functional way to communicate that need and get it met other than tantruming.
Before you took on other stuff,
right,
you would say because it's kind of like killing two birds with one stone here.
Right.
Because in reality, if the child is expending the energy to have a tantrum, you know that there's something they really want.
Yeah. So think about it this way: that we're going to take all that energy and be like, right, this child really cares about whatever it is they're trying to get. They really care about that. So let's get that energy and that motivation for whatever it is, and channel it into them learning something positive, a way of communicating in an appropriate way and getting their need met, and so the drive obviously is there because the kid is really, really wanting whatever it is, or to get out of doing whatever they want. So
for the caregiver, it's a win-win.
Right. So for the caregiver, you're going to get something out of it too, and you're very motivated to fix that problem. And also just knowing that if you don't fix those problems, that could really interfere with your kid's ability to learn other skills and work well with other therapists or whoever's coming into your home. And so that kind of crisis stuff is what we're going to assess first.
Love it.
And target that first. And what we've seen in the literature actually is if you teach functional communication skills, that can really have an impact on challenging behaviours at home, and those come down, and sometimes, repetitive stereotypical behaviours even change, and it's kind of like an indirect way of reducing overall challenging behaviour. Yeah. So you end up seeing a pattern of not just will you get rid of those tantrums, but perhaps you have a kind of spread of effect across other behaviours and in your home. Yeah, and it makes sense. If we remove ourselves from the emotional situation where you say, my child's tantruming, my child's making me crazy, I'm just at my wit's end, and remove ourselves from it and say, if there's a reason why. There's a reason why that they're engaging in this behavior, because they think it's going to work. Absolutely. They think it's going to work. Well, you don't do anything unless it's worked for you. Right. Like, we just don't do stuff out of the blue or for no reason. It's always for a reason. And so our kids are telling us something. Like, the kid is trying to tell you something. It may seem like they're just telling you, I'm being a brat, but they are also communicating something with you, and it's obviously got them what they want at some point in the past, and that's why they're doing it. And it's not a judgment, right? It's not a judgment of, oh, you did bad parenting and you gave in at some point, because you had to at some point. When the child came out and the child cried, you patted them, you fed them, you changed the diaper, you made them warm, you rocked them, that was your level of communication. Now you're asking for it to change. Right. But the child has to make the transition. Yes, and in order to change the child's behaviour, you have to change what you're doing. Yes. Oh, it's that thing that we never want to acknowledge. Because the child isn't operating in a vacuum. It's an interaction. It's like a little dance that you're doing with your kids. So you got to change the steps, otherwise the kid's just going to keep doing the same thing. So we're going to come in and we're going to figure out what the kid's communicating, and it's not just tantrums. Like, you could have a child who is shouting out in the classroom or something, and then you figure out, you do a functional assessment and you figure out, why is this child doing it? Oh, they don't know how to get the teacher's attention, so they're just causing a commotion. And then the kids are laughing, so they're getting attention from their peers as well. And so we then would say, okay, how can we're going to teach this kid to put their hand up or whatever, and then reinforce that. So it can be any kind of disruptive behaviour that's really important. Right. Not just tantrums. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be aimed at other people. It can be aimed at themselves too. The child who sits there and takes their own clothes off. Right, exactly. And there's a reason why. And again, we go back to the same thing that we say all the time. We can't guess. Right. Why? Because a child could be taking off their clothes because they're hot. A child could be taking off their clothes because they want attention. Or because they are uncomfortable with the sensation. Right. Or maybe they have an allergy to something. Who knows? Right. It could be anything. Could be a lot of things. So we really need to understand exactly what the child's trying to tell us, and then we can teach them functional communication to tell us that in an appropriate way. Okay. So I like this idea of starting with what you're already having a problem with, because everybody's going to have the most buy-in. It's going to make the most sense, and you can make a real difference. And what we're really doing is teaching the child the value of language and saying, look, this is why this is great for you, because you can communicate really, actually a lot less effort to communicate with a picture saying, I want juice, than to throw yourself on the ground and have a big tantrum. Right. It's a lot easier. Come on, do it, and the kid will see that and be like, oh, okay,
right.
You know, that's what we're aiming for, that they realize the value of the language, because then when we start working on it more, it's going to be easier.
A key point to what you just said, though, is that they need to get the reinforcement for it. That's not when they
deliberately.
When they you know, because so much happens in life, right? And you're busy and you're cooking dinner and whatever. But the moment in which the child does the functional communication and appropriately requests the thing they want, everything else has to be secondary.
Initially, it really, really is important that we acknowledge every appropriate communication and reinforce that, because you're basically competing against a history of inappropriate communication working.
Right.
So think about the example of the child in the classroom. If we teach the child how to put up their hand instead of like shouting out and saying a silly joke or something, if the teacher doesn't acknowledge that the child's put their hand up, it's not going to be very effective, because the kids, because you're competing against what worked all the time, the kid's just going to be like, oh no, I'm going to shout out, it works way better.
And later on, we can work on having it be intermittent, so that it doesn't happen every time.
We're not going exactly, and I have this come up a lot with parents where we're teaching the child to request, and we always start, like I said, with the most motivating things possible. So if a kid's favorite thing is a yogurt, and I had a wee guy who actually was really obsessed with yogurt, so it was the favorite thing in the world. So we started with yogurt and exchanging a picture to get a yogurt, and so the parents were delighted when he started doing this. Instead of like what he used to do was he would stand behind one of the parents and shove them towards the kitchen, which wasn't that disruptive, but kind of annoying. Yeah,
disconcerting.
And then if he was shoving them towards the kitchen, if they said anything to him, then he would like stamp his foot. And if that didn't work, then he would have like a scream kind of thing. So we were replacing that behaviour with this exchange of the picture, and he got it really, really fast, and they were absolutely delighted. But then, and so they're like giving him yogurts. I'm like, this is brilliant. And then the mom came to me and was like, he's eating like 6 or 7 yogurts a day. I don't know. We can't, like, I don't know what to do. Like, we can't keep doing this.
Right.
Like, are you telling me like I have to give him all these yogurts all day long for forever?
Bless her heart.
I know, but that's a very common worry from parents, that we are, say, especially if you're working with a kid, he loved yogurts and fruit, so that's great. But other kids, we might have to start with something like a cookie, or something, or a small piece of chocolate or something, and that's really unhealthy. We don't want to be giving copious amounts of those things forever. So I think it's a valid worry. But what we reassure parents is that just initially, we have to respond to every request to reinforce that behaviour and make it really strong, and to compete against the history of the other stuff working. And once we have that behaviour really well established, that requesting behaviour, then what we're going to do is we're going to move to the gambling model of reinforcement, where we want to get this child kind of addicted to responding. And so we move from the slot machine, like the Coke machine, where every time you put your dollar in, a Coke comes out, to the slot machine in the casino, where sometimes when you put money in, you get a massive reward, sometimes you don't. But you keep putting the money in because you might get it. So you keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, because every now and again it gets reinforced. So that's what we're aiming for. We're going to start off with a Coke machine, and then we're going to move the kid to the slot machine in the casino to try and get them almost addicted to using those skills.
But I also want to ask too, when you're giving the reward, if it's something like a cookie, or as you mentioned, chocolate, or they were saying the yogurt, that was what was reinforcing the child, you don't necessarily have to give the whole yogurt when they ask. You can give a spoonful of yogurt.
And that's another key thing, is that we don't need to give a child the entire cookie. In fact, you can create multiple opportunities. Like, it's all about creating as many opportunities as possible as well throughout your day for your kid to use this new skill. So yeah, you can break a cookie into, like, I don't know how many pieces, but a lot of pieces.
Crumbs, practically.
A lot of pieces. And then the kid's encouraged to eat more, and they're not going to get satiated or full up and not want any more. They're going to keep wanting more and keep asking, so you're keeping the motivation up. And you can do that with like crisps or potato chips as well, or anything that or the yogurt, like we would give him like a little spoon, and actually then we moved to the little petit filou or whatever, the little, I don't know if you have those.
I don't think we have those.
they're fromage frais, they're like little tiny yogurts. And kids really love them, and they're only about that big, they're about an inch high.
Oh, interesting.
And we got the mum to move him to those instead of like giving him these massive pots of yogurt as well. So then he could maybe have 2 of those, or 2 or 3 of those instead. You're
so being really mindful of it and thinking about
how can I get my kid to want more.
Yeah,
basically.
When we watch The A Word, we see that Jack Riley, the little boy, he's very motivated by pancakes, and that there is a plate, and they have little pieces. We don't often get to see it, but they have little pieces of pancake. He's not getting a whole pancake every time.
Right.
Little pieces of pancake that get popped into his mouth, and we should also say isn't necessarily always food. Sometimes it's a toy.
Absolutely. And so if your kid's asking, the most motivating thing is some toy, then you can give them access to it for a little while, and then swap it with something else. I mean, it really depends on the child, and you have to work closely with someone who knows what they're doing, I think, especially if it's something like a toy and it's very motivating, because if you try and take that away, you could be faced with a whole host of other things, other behavior problems, and knowing how to then prompt and deal with that as well.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why people like food early on is that it disappears.
Right,
it's consumable, it goes away.
I was going to say, it is much better if it's something that has a definite end.
Beginning, middle, and end.
You know, so it's actually something that can work quite well is YouTube clips, because YouTube clips are maybe pick ones that are like 30 seconds long or at the most or whatever, and then the kid asks again and you click on it again.
Right.
But again, you need to have control over it.
Yeah.
That's also key. Like, it's better to pick something that you have control over, so the child has to come to you or has to come through you to request to get it, because if they can get it by other means, then they probably aren't going to bother asking you. Yeah.
One of the things, because my son wasn't incredibly reinforced by food. There were some small exceptions, but you know, he was very reinforced. He had just gotten into cartoons when we started therapy, and we had a portable DVD player, and we had those. We got them at a dollar store. The DVDs that had the old black and white cartoons that for whatever reason that's what he preferred instead of color, and they would be about 45 seconds long, and it was child protected, so he couldn't touch the buttons. There were other things like that were very short, that toys that, like a wind-up toy, I know you've talked about this before, that he would find there was a little worm that would inch its way along, and it would go for 10 seconds and then have to be wound up again, and he didn't have the finger skills to do it, but you know, he would get so excited and jump up and down and say again, and make the little motion.
Or like our balloons, like when you blow up the balloon and then you let go of it and it whizzes around, or those little helicopter things that you blow up and then they whiz around. Those are great too. And my mind's just gone blank. I was thinking of something else there. I don't know, but I've done something similar like that with a kid who didn't have any didn't use any speech and didn't have any functional communication, and he loved certain programs, and the parents got a DVD player like that with a remote, and actually what we were trying to do initially was just getting the child to look at the parent, and realize, I need to engage with my parent to get something. And so we were just teaching him to make eye contact initially so we would stop the video and then prompt him to look at the parent, to be like, make it go. And then, you know, we obviously then developed that from just the eye contact to, I think sign. We used maybe sign with him. So yeah, you can use anything like that as long as you have control over it. And the kid has to go through you to get it to go again, or to get it have another turn or whatever.
And absolutely, those toys that have a beginning and an end, like we talk about the marble run here, that you put the marble at the top and it runs its course and it's done, and then you get the marble back and they have to earn the marble back again. That those kinds of things are much easier, especially in the beginning, than
you don't
saying,
have to take them away.
Here's Buzz Lightyear, play with it for a second, and now I'm going to take Buzz Lightyear away. You can get to that fairly quickly, but it's not efficient in the beginning.
Exactly.
Very exciting. Okay.
And then of course it's really important to prompt these new behaviors, because you don't want to be frustrating your child. You really don't want to. really don't want to pair using appropriate communication with frustration and annoyance. Because we want this to be easy. We want to be saying to the kid, look at this great easy way that you can get your needs met, rather than having a big tantrum. We don't want to be you know, having a child making some kind of effort and then just waiting and being like, no, try again, try again, try again, try again. That's not exactly what I wanted. That's not exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
You really, really do not want to do that with communication.
So we're rewarding approximations.
Right, we want to reward approximation, but we want to prompt the behaviour initially.
Okay.
So for example, if I have a child and I'm trying to use a picture exchange, I'm not going to expect them to know what to do initially.
Right.
I'm going to be probably physically prompting them and being, you know, holding up the item and then prompting the child to hand over the picture, and immediately they hand me the picture, handing them whatever it is they've asked for. It's going to be that deliberate. It's got to be really, really immediate.
Yeah.
It's like, you see the thing you want, you give me the picture, here you go, you get it.
Right, and literally
then,
physically moving them through it the first time, not assuming, you know, we talk all the time about giving them the right answer.
Exactly, you're going to be giving them the right answer, and then you're also intercepting them before any behaviour starts, because you really don't want to also pair the functional communication with inappropriate behaviour. So you don't want to be having the child, waiting for the child to get frustrated and annoyed before you prompt them, because then they may just feel like, I have to get frustrated and annoyed before anything happens.
Yeah, I think when people watch therapists working with children, I know I was this way before. For a long time I was this way. I wanted to say before, and then I was like, well, a long time. But, you know, you see a child sitting there in the chair and the therapist is working with them, and the child is sitting there all wonderfully nice and, you know, not engaging in all kinds of behavior. And then I would sit and try to do something with my child. He'd be under the chair, he'd be around the chair, he'd be behind the chair, he'd be sticking stuff up his nose, you know, and I would think, I can't even get my child to sit in the chair. But that in and of itself is a whole series of lessons to get that buy-in.
Exactly.
And therapists, there's something poetic about watching a good therapist, because they are hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, they know what kinds of things, they can tell when the child's about to lose interest, they're always like Johnny on it, immediate, you know, I say this, you do this, reward, I say this, you do this, reward, and it's that quick. And if they see the child, before the child has got time to go under the chair, they're immediately introducing something else and, you know, prompting and keeping the child. It takes time.
It does, and it's not going to probably feel natural at all, because it's going kind of against everything that you have been doing or expect to doing, because it is that deliberate.
Yeah.
But that's where we have to start.
Yeah. So, but, you know, just realize, though, you know, kind of what you're talking about, that whole thing of, you know, don't give them time to engage in other behaviors, that there is a fluency in terms of the deliverer of the therapy that you need to get
initially, you really just don't want to wait and see what happens. It's like, as soon as you know your child, so say we're dealing with this tantrum behaviour and it's related to the child wanting something to eat, we're not going to wait till we wait for the child to get really hungry and irritated and like be like, oh, or not pay attention, and then he's suddenly having a tantrum, and then we're like, oh no, okay, like now let's try and teach him how to request appropriately when he's in the middle of a tantrum. We really want to be watching him, and before he has a chance to get to his trigger, that we're prompting him to communicate prior to that, if that makes sense.
It does.
We want to jump in there and beat him to it.
Yes. All of that makes sense, but in the day-to-day life, you're going to make mistakes.
Right.
You are going to make mistakes. I know that. Evelyn knows that. You're going to accept that you're going to make mistakes. When you do make a mistake, what do you think is the best thing to do? Let that moment go and seek the next available moment?
I think it depends what mistake you're making.
That's true.
Yeah, it's going to what I would say to do probably depends on what it is that's happened.
I guess that's very true.
But just remember, ultimately, you know, you're going to have times where you do the wrong thing. Like as a BCBA and a therapist, there's times whenever I am like, oh, I don't think I chose the right thing to do there. But you just have to look at it and realize what you did, and then you just move on, and you're like, next time, just don't dwell on it.
Right.
Don't stress out about it.
We get out the wet noodles, we give ourselves 30 lashes, and then we're all in our head, and we miss 5 more moments that we would have had an opportunity to do something in a different way.
Right, and it's I mean, when you're in that moment, you are having to make a decision, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and you just have to make a decision about what to do, and then you just do it. So it's just about realizing that you did the wrong thing, or you know,
or not the highest,
not the best thing that you could have done, or maybe you don't even know what it is that you should have done. But just leave it alone, and try really hard to be like, okay, I'm going to create so with the communication, so say you feel like you messed up a communication and the kid had a tantrum and it just all went wrong. So what you want to do is come out of that and be like, okay, I didn't handle that very well. So what I'm going to do is try and now create, once the kid's calm over the behaviour, I'm now going to create some positive interactions with my child where he can communicate with me appropriately, and I'm going to practice those. So just try and create, you know, go and contrive some situations or something where you can practice the positive skills, and then you will feel better and your kid will have the opportunity to practice the right way to do things, and you have the chance to practice the right way to do things, I think.
Okay. I kind of want to go back to, if somebody, you know, I keep thinking about the person who wrote in and said, how do I get my girls to talk? For somebody who is at that point and they've not done an ABA at this point, but is maybe thinking about doing ABA, and they want to get to functional communications.
Yeah, we kind of...
That's what we were
going to talk about assessment and so on. We kind of got sidetracked.
But with a really important discussion. So expectation, though, you know, what we would say to them is, in the ideal situation, you would contact an ABA provider. You'll
have someone who's working with you who understands language development and functional communication, not just teaching words, but how kids communicate and how they use their language, and the different ways that we use language to communicate. And then you're going to have that person's going to come and they're going to basically figure out where along the line of development your child is, and that helps us understand, us as behaviour analysts, figure out where we need to start teaching. So your kid, like I said, we have some kids coming in and they have like a massive vocabulary, but they have no clue how to ask for something they want. And you know, we think, oh, they have all these words, why are they not using them? But that could be where that kid's at. So that kid's functioning maybe over here, and they have like, well, they have all this vocabulary which is kind of up here, but then they're like way down here in terms of how they're using their language functionally.
And that is unique unto them.
And that's unique unto them. You might have another child who comes in and they are really good at requesting, and really good at like labeling things, but not so good at some other things. Or they maybe have 5 words that they use, or 2 words that they use to communicate everything. You know, so they're here and they're here. So every kid's in a different position, and they have different skills, and in terms of their communication.
And where you start depends on where the child is.
Exactly.
And it depends on where the team is, and how much time you have, and what needs to have happen. Because, and so I just want to drive home that it's different in every single circumstance, which is why when we saw that question, it was that, where, you know, where do we begin?
Because really, we can't answer it because we don't know where the child that we're talking about is. We don't know where those 2 kids, I think it was 2 kids, was it?
She said, how do I get my girls?
It was 2 kids, so we don't know where those 2 kids are in terms of that pattern of development, so we don't know where we would need to step in and start reinforcing and prompting and doing all that. And we don't know what mode either, because we don't know whether we would use pictures or sign or go straight into speech. Like, we just don't know, because we don't know where the kid is functioning.
Absolutely. And really important, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about during the break was that, you know, I remember having a conversation with Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet where she talked about how a long time ago at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, they had this big, I don't know whether she said to me it was yellow, I've always pictured it in my head as yellow, but I pictured this, from what she said to me, this big piece of yellow paper that went, it was so big it went around a room.
Yeah, I believe that.
And that it listed all of the individual skills that a child, and they just added on to it over time. That, you know, what skills does a child need to acquire, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was just a massive, massive piece of paper. And she said, you know, but part of the problem is knowing all those lessons, like, what does this individual child need? Like, where on this page do you start? And which lessons are necessary for this individual child? And I just remember it was like my heart almost came out of my chest, because I thought, this is exactly what I have been feeling, the overwhelm. I am an ex-teacher, but this is the overwhelm that I have felt as a parent of, you know, I don't know where to start. And what I love is that all of that information was consolidated and put in a place where parents and teachers and practitioners can use it easily. And of course, I'm talking about skills. You guys know that I love skills, and that I use it at home. But there are many, many aspects to skills that are just brilliant. But it cannot be understated that the assessment portion of the skills program is absolutely mind-bogglingly amazing. That it takes all of those different things and gives a parent an opportunity to step in and answer questions that are easily followed and have, not only is there a question, but there's also an explanation for every single question. So if you don't understand the question, you get a concrete example that you can really answer and go, oh, yes or no. And there are some instances, I should clarify that there are some instances where you go, I don't know if my child can do that, and there's room for that as well. But that then it takes that whole, the system takes it and figures out and says, okay, here are lessons that are appropriate for this child.
Here's all the things that your child needs to learn, and it's all the things that your child needs to learn to get up, if they were to be caught up to their chronological age. But even that in itself can be overwhelming, because the child, everything is broken down to every single little tiny thing that a typical child learns. And I was saying to Shannon in the break that sometimes people come in and they say, oh, they see like maybe talking, expressive language. We need to work on expressive language, and they don't break that down into, well, how do we get the kid to get there? Or look at all these steps that a typically developing child goes through, and look at all these skills that make up being able to do this. So if you just start right in here, your kid's going to really struggle and possibly fail. And then, but what we don't want to do is to say, well, the kid can't learn this.
Right, because that's not the truth.
It's not the truth at all. So behavior, that's what's brilliant about behavior analysis, and I love it for this, but it allows you to have tools that can help you break down everything back. So you just need to go back a step and find where the hole is. Find the prerequisite that your kid doesn't have. And then we start teaching there and working up to this skill.
I was saying to her during the break, it's like knitting the sweater, right? And my mother loves to knit on circular needles, right? And it just goes around and around, and the tube gets long. But if you've missed a thread way back at the beginning, it's a hole. And if you miss a bunch of threads, you start to have a holey sweater. And you have to go back. You have to go back and take care of those holes. You don't necessarily need to throw away the whole sweater, right? But you got to go back and take care of those holes. And that's sometimes our kids are Swiss cheese.
Yeah, they are.
We got to fill the holes.
Usually there are holes there, and we have to make sure we fill those in. I mean, sometimes we do our best, and sometimes we will get to a point along the developmental track, which is never like this anyway. It's always like all over the place. But we get to point B, and then we realize, oh, we're getting stuck here. What's happening? And usually if you get stuck somewhere, it's because we missed a hole somewhere, and then it's just a case of going back and figuring out where that hole is, and then going back to B and then moving on. So like I said, it's not like this kind of linear process. It does tend to jump around all over the place.
And it is for sure not one size fits all.
Nope.
It is not a, A, B, C, and arrive at D, all kids. It just isn't
like
that
in
way.
Skills, we try to break things down into what the core fundamental skills are. So within the language and communication, we have these core fundamental things that kids need to be able to do to be able to function in everyday life. But we may find that some kids we might be able to go in and just work on those fundamentals, just work on every single one along the way, and they get it. Other kids, we have to give them stepping stones to get towards those skills. So we have to introduce some extra steps towards the end goal. Other kids might need one step, but then they're able to jump forward a few. Some kids maybe need 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps, then they get it. It's really is individual to the child. And what skills does is it breaks down. We have these fundamental core skills, and then it tells you what steps you might want to try. So sometimes you might want to just go in and teach the fundamental skill and skills, but then it doesn't work. So then you can go back and pick some of these stepping stone type things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it also encourages you. It kind of gives you everything in a way that is in terms of easiness. It's not, easy isn't necessarily the right word, but it's supposed to be kind of the simpler skills versus the more advanced skills. So, and then the things that develop at say 0 years, and then the things that develop at 10 years, and obviously it helps you see that you should work on the early skills before the late skills, and so on. So those are the types of things that we as clinicians think about. as well.
Yeah, crawling before you walk kind of thing, you know, which isn't necessarily the case for everybody.
No.
But it's there so that you can choose, here's the crawl, here's the walk. Literally, there are those lessons in there as well. The motor skills, as I think
And
about
what we find with children with autism is quite often they do need to learn some kind of interim skills or stepping stones, which maybe typical kids don't.
Right.
But our kids do. They need a little bit of extra learning along the way, or extra
more
teaching.
opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. This is all fascinating. I think we run the risk of getting overwhelmed because it sounds like it's so much to do.
It is.
But I want to remind everybody that this is not something that you try to do on your own. That you need some help, you need some support. There's, you know, and we talk endlessly about working with a BCBA in whatever way you can.
And it's baby steps, and I feel like what I'm really trying to say here is that there's hope, and that no matter what your BCBA or me as a BCBA is trying to do is to find where we can start teaching. And it's not like your kid can't do this. Oh well, it's like okay, we're gonna get here, so we have to just try out all these different things. Look at your specific child. What can they do? What can we harness to move forward? What can we teach this child to move forward? And that's really what I'm trying to emphasize. So it seems really overwhelming, but that's because there's hope there for any child because there's so much to work with, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that's with many things, but functional communication skills is at the core, at the core of everything. So, all right, it's a conversation that we'll continue to have because there's so much to talk about, and hopefully you guys will, we have a question. What are the preferred TV shows for children on the spectrum that gives appropriate language that is more mature than shows like Mickey Mouse or Caillou? My son is 10 and is mainstream with a full-time aide in public school going into 3rd grade. Thanks for all that you're doing. So much support to me daily. Thank you so much for writing that in. And because I have a child who's 9, I can.
So you must be the expert.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this at all, but there are a couple of things that I can recommend. And there's a wide variety of different stuff depending on what your child's interested in. But for instance, there is a new electric company that is on that we find really fun that I think addresses language skills that are for kids who are older. It's not like the old electric company. Dating myself here, but there was the old electric company, and they would sit there and they'd go air, and then they'd put it together and make chair. Well, this new electric company, it's a group of kids, it's a troop of kids, and they have powers that they can do with words and scramble words and put words together. And there's always a scenario, and they're like superheroes. So that's kind of fun. I'm trying to think of some of the other. If it depends on what your child's skill level is, because there's the Super Y that's older than Mickey Mouse, but I think it's not age appropriate necessarily for a 10-year-old where Electric Company is, but if you need to go back and pull up some skills, it's a really great show to kind of catch up to speed. One of the other shows that we really loved that I can't get anymore is Between the Lions. Again, that's somewhere in between the Mickey Mouse and maybe might be a little boring for a 10-year-old depending on what they're into, but a very exciting show that had a lot of different language things and also reading skills in there. And I'll talk to my son and my husband, and I'll come up with a list of more, but we really like the new electric company. And not only that, we try to pair a lot of things. My son's into science, so we try to do a lot of science programs. We currently, on Netflix, you can just search topics of things, and once you find a video that you like,
then it
spits
really
out and says to you, you might like this as well.
And you can do like search similar titles or something like that, similar types of things. It's really
but I can definitely recommend the Electric Company, and I'll search the family memory banks to see what else that there is that your child might enjoy. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll keep you posted on that. We have to say goodbye to you because it's time for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. But thank you so much. Always, I appreciate it. I know they do too. The time and the energy and the effort and the empathy with which you address these issues is just really phenomenal and exceptional and means so much to me and to us. So thank you for being here.